And we've got a few questions on the sidebar. So we are going to start with all three. Are all organizations in Nigeria, including faith-based organizations, required to have data protection officer? First, Maurice, and then Ito, please.
Yes, yes. All it's compulsory if you are a data controller, and the data controller is basically the person who determines the reason for use and purpose of the information. As I always tell people, the data controller is the organ of the information, and it's compulsory. And if you do not have one, then you should use a company that can provide you those services. But to me, like one of those things that like happen, we always talk theoretically. And I mean, I remember when we were doing the FOI, trying to implement it, they brought up, there was an issue of we should have a regulator, but they brought up we should go to court. And up till now, since I left, I don't think there's any decision on freedom of information that has gone through the courts. So we always tend to take theoretical things, but yes, theoretically we should have. But how, when you talk of a one-man business, when you talk of a business of about 3 people, or a law firm of 1 person, or a church, should that person really start being involved in all the requirements? It's a very tricky one. I mean, here there's a threshold with the number of people that you employ and all that, and the amount of data. So yes, we do have, but how practical it is, especially mindful of what we know and mindful of what Brian said, when the level of data protection knowledge and data protection compliance is low. So when you put in these theoretical things, and just to round up, my fear is, having worked in Nigeria, having had my law firm, my fear, and I'm not trying to denigrate, but this is my practical experience, is that one day somebody will wake up and say, there's this role, let us start finding other people that don't have. And then it now becomes an opportunity for people to be fined, an opportunity for people to now come and start negotiating. Oh, sorry, I don't have this, I don't have that. But if we look at it as a long-term thing, fine. But I think we should have made it bespoke to the Nigerian environment, because telling somebody who only uses data for a few things to have the same data protection officer or compliance level as somebody as a big firm. But this is not to say, I see the advantages that it may be to inculcate a culture of data privacy. So in that respect, it may not be bad, but yes, we do have.
Thank you.
Maurice, there was another question, maybe as you're speaking, you want to treat that. So there's a question about, can you throw a little bit more light on the status and processing of household data?
Well, there are several cases, but so you tend to look at why. There's a case called link waste, where a woman was doing something for her church, processing data for her church, and she wanted to paste certain things in a bulletin, and she brought up that provision, because basically the definition was, if you're not using it for business or sole purposes. So she brought up that exemption, but the Court of Justice of the European Union said no, because it needs to be private and family. Now, another decision has also said, what is private and family? So for example, I use the CCTV example. So it's don't forget, one of the things in the ICO, and one of the things data protection authorities use, is that there's a bit of common sense. They use a pragmatic approach, because if they said, if household data, pure household data that was for private and family is used, then people, I mean, someone like my 2 young boys, one of them will have taken me to court that trying to get extra pocket money from me, saying, why did you give Uncle this my data? So let us leave it that household data, when you use household data, it is for private and family. So if you have a personal address book and it is lost, that is your personal address book. If you have a phone in your personal phone, and this is why it is always good to separate, never use office. I try not to use office, separate my office and my home, office laptop, home laptop. Like for example, this seminar, this presentation, I'm using my home personal. I'm using my personal laptop. I'm not using my official laptop. So if we do keep that separate, the more conflated, the more it is mixed, the more problems we have. But basically, household, let's leave it to private, family with with a bit of common sense. My WhatsApp, if my WhatsApp, my address book is stolen and information stolen from my personal phone, I will not get into trouble, because that is using it personally. But if it is official phone, I might get into trouble for that.
Thank you, Maurice. I'm going to ask Ito, how secure is data pass through email and social media platforms like WhatsApp? A question by Dr. Inabulele.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. But is it okay if I touch on the requirements for appointing a DP?
Okay. Yeah, and then
if that's okay. Just to add to what Maurice has said, Section 3.4 of the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation actually identifies the requirements, and that's very similar to the requirements under the GDPR. So these requirements include government agencies are required to have data protection officers, and then controllers. So I think there's a bit of fairness there. Data controllers that process 10,000 or more records per annum. So basically, just as in terms of one has to be reasonable, realistic here. So organizations that do not process that much do not require a data protection officer. But that being said, that doesn't mean the organization should not have a data protection, maybe administrator, manager, or appoint one voluntarily. But in terms of requirements, when you must, and when you could be penalized if you don't meet, if you don't appoint one, that's when there could be an issue. Then another reason is whereby special category sensitive data, which is what we call special category data, on a large scale is being processed. So for I think about churches, so religious opinion is classified as special category data. So the answer is yes. Regardless of the 10,000 records, they would require a data protection officer.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess that's
specifying that. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. There's another one, Ito.
Okay.
By Dr. Inabule, he says, can any of the speakers throw light on safeguards in the GDPR against corruption and money laundering? How secure is data passed through email and social media platforms?
Okay, now the main thing here is that how secure is data in the sense that, but one key thing, what we need to look into, there are ways to secure data, and one way is by having these systems encrypted. Okay, so basically that's actually a requirement under the GDPR. So when you send an email from one email to the other, your system may be encrypted, but in transit, it may be, should I say, accessed, or I mean, it may not be totally secure. So what we normally suggest is that, for example, do not share, think about suitable ways of sharing data, rather than maybe sending an attachment via email and thinking it's secure. That's not enough, because there may be no end-to-end encryption. Okay, so better ways to share data would be by maybe using a secure platform. So you whereby you could use maybe even a cloud-based provider, such as maybe Google Drive, OneDrive, and you can then restrict access. So that you can then restrict access in the sense that maybe access based on the individual. So you can create maybe based on the person's email address. So only a specific person receiving a code can access that information. Or it might be that if you are within the same organization, you could send an email send an email, but in terms of maybe the sensitive confidential information could be linked to maybe an internal network. So when you click on the link, then you can, if you have access to that network, then you can access the file. Quite interesting. I have a good example here where I was working with an organization as their DPO, and I received an email from another DPO, and it had confidential information. So I was put in their email as one of the recipients. They didn't realize they had sent it to me because the email address was dpo@so-and-so. And after receiving a couple, and I decided to review, and I realized that it wasn't intended for me. But the smart thing, the good thing they had done, and this was actually a government agency, was that I had an idea of the discussion, the conversation, but the file was actually linked to their network. So when I saw the URL, the link, the website address, or the file location address, I knew I couldn't even open it. So that was good. So we do make mistakes. Maurice mentioned it earlier. We do make mistakes. But if you think about data protection by default, by design, and take all these into consideration, we can avoid such issues. So there was no problem at the end with that individual that sent an email to me because I didn't even attempt opening the file, but I knew I couldn't open it. And then talking about encrypted. So when we're talking about emails and all that, we need to think about encryption. Now, if you share data that is not in encrypted format, or maybe if you have a laptop, this is a key one, that is not encrypted and you use your laptop, that's easy access. And that alone would raise a penalty. Now in there's an organization I worked with some years ago, about 20 years ago, not as a DPO then, but I looked them up a few years back, and I found out that in 2010, a member of staff lost their laptop and it wasn't encrypted. At that time, they were fined £60,000 just for the loss of a laptop. If that were to occur today, we'll be talking about at least £500,000. Yes, so encryption is very key with regards to securing for transfer. I understand WhatsApp is encrypted, but then again, WhatsApp, we're talking about Facebook here, what do they do with that data? So it might be encrypted, but how secure is it? What do they do with it? That's another question. It's a question for another day.
Thanks, Ito. I'm going to give two questions to Maurice, one by Fumi Nije. What do you say to a one-man business with many clients and holding PII? And then the second one is from Dr. Enabulele. It says, hotels in Nigeria are required to regularly submit data on their clients to the state security services, ostensibly to enhance their surveillance activities. How is this viewed in the GDPR or NITDA?
Firstly, what do I say to a one-man business with many clients? You still have a responsibility to keep your data, and by PII, it means personal identifiable information. But you still have a responsibility to treat your data very, very carefully. As I said, it doesn't even have to be a business. I give the example of even for church activities. So please, data protection is an obligation on anybody that handles data in a manner that is not for private and personal use. So do not, once you're using it for business purposes, and even if you have one client or two clients, I said 1,000 is not too many. One is not enough, 1,000 is not too many. So please take care of all the data. The same care with one is the same care you do with other one. Treat it with tender, loving care. Then with regard to the people, the taking of names and all of that, even there are certain exemptions when it comes to purpose of data. Sometimes, like on NITDA or sometimes here, it may be that there is a statutory exemption. So, for example, there's a purpose where you hold the data for statutory purposes. So it spoke about the legal basis. So sometimes you may hold it for legitimate interest. Sometimes you hold it because the law says you should hold it and send it to them. I'll just give you an example, not to do with security or money laundering, but I'll give you an example. For example, tax. Now, tax information, they know all my details, they know this, but you have to send that tax information to the Inland Revenue or the HMRC. It is your statutory obligation. So there are times where the laws of the state insist that you must process the information this way. And in those kind of situations, there is a presumption that the benefits to the state override yours. Now, but when this is a topical issue now, because this is one of the reasons the USA Privacy Shield broke, because now one of the things the European Data Protection Board is bringing out, which is saying is that now if I was to transfer data from here to a hotel in Nigeria, I have to take into consideration these laws. So that is just from the GDPR there. But if you are in Nigeria, and that is the law, and I don't know whether it has a different purpose. If the law says this is what you should do, then there is an inbuilt that is one of the purposes for which you are holding it. So the purpose for processing that information, the details the government is asking you to send to them, is that. And don't forget, there are other purposes, I mean, money laundering activity, criminal activity. So sometimes the police, you can find out that even some of those activities, for example, in Rivers State, about 2 years ago or so, there was a serial killer. I don't know whether you recall, there was a serial killer murdering women, young women, strangling them and leaving. Now, those are some of the criminal, those are some of the statutory purposes that may override, because part of the way he was caught was because of these serial returns. Of course, sometimes one we need to challenge them, but I don't think when it comes to some of those things, the rights, it is taken that there's a presumption that the benefit to society at large, whatever society it is, that's the society in Nigeria, is greater than the rights of privacy of the individual in that situation. And don't forget, sometimes if there's nothing being done, there's nothing being done. But yes, there are rules, and it's not just here in the United States, there are surveillance rules. Even in Britain, there are surveillance rules here. So the Nigerian is not the only one. And I've done some, when I was working with the police a long time ago, the way surveillance is done, don't think that it's only in Nigeria that it is done.
Okay, thank you, Maurice. Quickly, what are the qualifications for DPOs? Can anyone be trained to play the role of a DPO, or only those with HMIS certification are allowed to serve as DPO? Please, you and Ito.
Yeah, well, to be the first qualification is that it's something that you're passionate about. I mean, when you see someone like Ito talking, or even somebody like Brian, I mean, for somebody who is that's not his field to be speaking like that. So the first interest, as I tell people, I entered this thing because I like to preach the gospel of data protection. So that's the first interest. But of course, to do the job well, you need to be trained, you need to have an interest, and then to progress your career, it is better to be professionally certified, because when you're professionally certified, you have access to learning. I mean, I remember Ito is, there are so many. So once you are interested, then you build your career. Like, for example, I could be lying down watching Netflix, and all of a sudden on the weekend, and all of a sudden I see something to do with information, and I read it, not because it's my job, but because I have a passion. I have a passion in it. But I tell people it's a very, very interesting career if you are considering it as a career. And I advise, Kaden knows, anywhere I talk, I tell people all my friends' children consider it because it is virgin territory. And I believe it is data protection will do to Nigerians, especially Nigerian diaspora, what IT and medicine did to improve and increase us as an economically viable sector of the British, UK, and overseas diaspora.
Oh, very viable. So Ito, quickly, 1 second.
All right then. Okay, yes, I do agree. Particularly being that you need to be a privacy evangelist to think about the role, and that's me. I'm very passionate about the role. Yes, but in terms of qualifications, there's no specific qualification, but what the guideline, what the requirement is that the DPO needs to be an expert. So you think about it, if you go for an interview, how do you prove you're an expert? Expertise comes with experience and knowledge. And of course, you know that you would always back up your claim with a certification. So there are quite a number of certifications, but allow me say that what I recognize as the most, what I think is the most recognized, globally recognized qualification would be the IAP, International Association of Privacy Professionals certifications. There are other ones for data protection practitioners and so on. Yes, so with regards to qualifications, that's the way to go. But what we also need to remember is that when considering the role of a DPO, there could be conflict of interest. Now, in terms of the role of a DPO, you could have a contractor or an internal member of staff. Not every internal member of staff could be a DPO because there could be conflict of interest. So for example, the chief information officer cannot be a DPO because that is so a way to qualify to know if there's conflict of interest is if your role, if you are able to determine the purpose and the means of processing within the organization, then you cannot be a DPO. Yes, I've worked with a number of organizations and they asked me to come in for consultation with the intention of somebody taking on the role of the DPO. But now I can clearly say that, normally we say the GDPR doesn't recommend that because of the conflict of interest. But an organization has actually been fined now for this, not because there was a data breach, but just simply because they recruited someone. It's not the title that matters, it's actually the function, the role of the person within the organization. So they actually recruited, I believe, a compliance officer. That would normally seem fine. You would expect that to be okay, to be a DPO, but because there was conflict of interest and the organization was actually fined 50,000, quite low, 50,000 euros for that. So yes, yeah, those are just qualifications and sense of passion.
All right, so you need passion, you need expertise, you need skills, you need the certification, and you also need to be aware of conflict of interest. I'm going to give the three of you 1 minute each to give your closing remark. So starting with Maurice, what is your takeaway?
Well, it's been great. As Ito and Brian has said, this whole thing, I mean, I've tried to condense, simplify, but really if we were to talk, if you gave me 1 week, I still will not finish it, So the thing is that for those who have attended, I just hope that it has increased the profile of what data protection is. It has engaged your interest, and it has made you realize the value and realize that whenever you see personal data issues, I don't want you to, because like I always tell people, I'm so technically unskilled. When I see an Excel spreadsheet, I raise my head and say, oh. But when you hear data protection, please be interested in it. And I believe if you have any queries, you can always find help. So thank you for having me, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Maurice. So data protection is valuable. It's also an area where there are opportunities. It's future-proof. We are in a space where encourage people. Data protection is key. Ito.
Yes, I have much to add, and I'll just keep it simple. If anything at all, I quite like what Maurice mentioned when he was speaking. He talked about treating people's data like your data. So, and that's one step. So in terms of data protection, just have that interest, and that will be one step into, compliance. But secondly, of course, I don't expect everyone to be as technical. Pardon me if I'm using technical terms, but we also have to consider the principles and lawful basis. So yes, for example, one of the questions I think by was answered was a question on sharing data lawfully for maybe whereby there's a legal obligation. So that's fine. So it's a case of yes, there's legal obligation, but what we need to consider as well at every time is how do we share this data? So it's not a case whereby, yes, I'm allowed to share it, but how do you go about doing it? So we need to think about data protection by design, that's at every stage throughout the life cycle, as well as data protection by default, so that the default setting is, has to do with compliance, data privacy, and data protection compliance. So where you can reduce the amount of information, if the government agency doesn't require such information, you don't have to. If you can anonymize, that's remove personal information before sending, as long as it still makes sense. So you may just need aggregate data, do that. Or you could also, what we say, pseudonymize the data by using pseudonyms, so that it's a lot more secure. So that if, for example, in transit, the data gets lost, then it will be more secure. So in general, what I would say to end it is think about data protection by design, data protection by default. And thank you very much. I could go on and on.
Thank you, Ito. So treat people's data like your own data, have the interest and it's a step to compliance. And also, when you are going to send, consider ways in which you can protect data. How can you share it? So look at protection by design and also protection by default. Thank you, Ito. Brian.
Okay. Thank you once again for the opportunity. Once again, I'm grateful for the platform to speak and to share. Thank you to the other panelists as well for sharing their wisdom and teaching all of us about the flair stuff involved in data protection. In truth, we all have a job, and no real move will happen without deliberate and consistent individuals who care about it. So play your part, do what you can within your circle of influence, and slowly but surely we'll have a more data conscious people, and we'll all be a little more data responsible if we all just do our little bit. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you, Brian. So play your part, do whatever you can to be data compliant and be a champion. As Maurice has said, as Itio has said, be an evangelist. So I will now call on Kede to give the closing remark. Kede.
Well, let me say thank you very much to everyone that has spoken and participated. I actually enjoyed it very much. When you're also into data, there's the temptation to jump in, but we got to keep it professional. So I needed to process everything and listen carefully to what everyone has said. I have to say, very, very impressed with Maurice Aselwa, Ito Onojo, and Brian actually caught a lot out of me in the sense that for somebody who is not a data person per se, his expertise as a business analyst and being able to tie it with the system in Nigeria and having an understanding was quite impressive. But I'm going to embarrass him and shock everyone here. Brian is only 26 years old. So for a young person to have all the educational exposure and at the highest level run a company, as a matter of fact, he's the chairman or president of that company, is a good friend, but he said something which was very moving. He said, this young man is brilliant. And I have no doubt that he is truly a brilliant person who is running a company at that stage with international connections at a very young age. So credit to Brian. I think I was very impressed with what he said. And I think moving forward, we obviously will collate the videos and disseminate to a much more wider audience. But I have to say this, that some of the issues that have come up will require solutions. So we are not just a talk shop, we don't just talk. We will have to find a way of obviously addressing those issues, especially with Nigeria. I think implementation is a challenge always in Nigeria. And so we need to take it serious. The MTN is a good example of what regulators can really do to people when you don't comply. MTN was fined $5 billion US. I know it has nothing to do with data, so there's nothing stopping NIDA one day waking up and looking at a business run by a small company and say, you know what, as a matter of fact, the Nigerian government is looking for money now. They're actually trying to use a law, CAMA 2020, the Financial Services Act, to claim dividends that have been lying idle for 12 years. So they know that there's money there. They know that if your money is dormant in a bank for say 6, 7 years, the government has the power to take that fund and take it for themselves. So there's nothing also stopping NIDA from fining companies. They can just get up and say, you know what, you haven't done it. And it's a strict liability offense. So there's no excuse to say, I didn't know. The laws are there. So let me not go on. I'm also a data-driven person, but again, let me also say that Nigeria Magazine, we've been doing this for 10 years, and our next event is next month sometime in February, but it will be on diversity and inclusion, which will be a very interesting topic itself. And I really enjoyed the chat, looking at the chat and the questions that were asked. We don't have enough time to thank everybody, whether it's FA, whether it's Johnny, whether it's Clem, whether it's Maurice, Dr. Osahon. I can go on and on and on, but I would say thank you very much. I think it's been a very productive 2 hours. And once again, Happy New Year to everyone. It's not too late to say that. Thank you very much and have a very wonderful weekend. But we look forward to seeing you next month. We will disseminate the information and continue to listen to us at Nigeria Magazine. I have to plug that in. This is what we do, and we do it very well, and we've done it for 10 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. And we've had a very, very productive session, as Kede said. And we've learned a lot, and we've had practical examples of what is taking place in Nigeria. But one thing is clear, this is an area of opportunity. Take it up, promote it. Data protection is here to stay. And Brexit, EU, Nigeria, the whole world. Data privacy and data protection practitioners are required. This is a future-proof profession. So share the word. And wishing you a very, very lovely weekend. See you next month. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.